It's lovely to be back in your beautiful church again. It's always like coming home for me when I come here. I've been coming for a few years now, and it's always such a warm welcome that I receive, and I thank you all for that very much. Now today, as Leslie said at the beginning, is the 1st of May. Now it doesn't mean much in the United States, but it means a great deal in Europe. May Day is one of the greatest and most ancient celebrations in Europe. It's become very much a political celebration now. It's a public holiday. But back in the mists of time, at the time of the Druids and the Celts, then May Day was known as Beltane, and it was the time to welcome the warming sun after the coldness of winter, because it wasn't, it's not much like Florida in the UK. It's much more like it is up in the northern part of the United States. And welcoming back the warmth of the sun and the lighting of fires to symbolize that. The Beltane fires blazed all over the land. Doesn't happen today. But they were great believers then, and knew, I feel, a great deal more about the power of the Spirit than we do. The Druids knew many mysteries which I unfortunately feel have disappeared with them. Mysteries that enabled them to use the power of the Spirit to help everybody. And the Celtic tradition was an early example of the whole of humanity working together. Men and women, there was no difference. Whereas along came the Romans with their male-dominated society, and they destroyed all that over a period of time. But the other aspect of May Day, which is still celebrated in many villages in England, is the tradition of the maypole. And in the old days, each village they'd go out into the local wood and they'd find the tallest tree, and they'd lop the branches, the lower branches off, and then they'd erect it in the centre of the village, and they would dance around it. Well, of course, as often happens when a nation gets conquered, as they were by the Romans, old traditions are married with new ones. And the Roman festival of that time of the year was a festival for their god Flora, who is the god of flowers. And so when the maypoles were erected after the Romans came, they used to make strings of violets and twist them around the pole. Now, what happens today, and used to happen when I was a youngster, is that the maypole is set up in the centre of the village, and there's lots of coloured ribbons, long coloured ribbons that stretch down from the top of the pole, and then children. There's a child at the end of each ribbon, and they perform intricate dances to wrap the ribbon around the pole in different patterns. And then they dance the other way to unwrap it again, and it's quite intricate, and it's wonderful. And it's very significant, I feel, that we have a celebration of the return of the sun coupled with the children, because children are so important. Apart from children being our future, children have an attitude towards life which most of us have forgotten, much to our own individual cost. Children accept things as they are. To a child, the circumstances in which they are born are normal. But what happens throughout their life as children. They accept. And they have their differences, of course, when they're playing with their friends, but they don't usually hold on to those differences. Next day, it's all forgotten, and we're back to playing lightly and with love again. And you know, it's something that we could all remind ourselves of, the spontaneity of children, the spontaneity of being able to live now, rather than worrying about what happened before or what might be going to happen in the future. Because it's only now, it's only in this moment that we have any control whatsoever. Once this moment has passed, that's it, we're in the next moment. It's the only one over which we have any control at all. And it is the moment that determines what's going to happen in the future. Unfortunately, the moment is often coloured by what's happened in the past. But for children, that doesn't happen. They don't usually bring all this baggage from the past into the present moment. They enjoy the present moment, and the present moment goes on forever. I used to remember, and I'm sure you did, when we came out of school for the long summer holiday, it seemed to stretch for eternity. It would never come to an end. And it's wonderful to be able to enjoy each moment like that, because once we start worrying about what might have gone wrong in the past, we spoil the moment. We can't enjoy it, we can't take advantage of it. We can't be ourselves. You see, I believe we are here to be. Nothing else. There's no great mystery, I believe, about the reason for life. It is to be. And we can only be now. And in the being, then we build our personality, we build our spiritual power, we build so that when we return to our homes in the world of the Spirit, we take with us all these experiences that have enriched us. And the interesting thing is, you know, that it's very often the experiences which we don't like very much that give us the greatest strength. I know it's an old illustration, but in order to produce gold from the rock, you have to put the rock into a furnace. You have to burn away all the dross. And then you're left with a pure, beautiful gold. And so it is with us. That it's when we go through the fire, when things go wrong, when there's suffering, then that polishes us up. That the diamond which is inside each one of us is much brighter as a result of that. And I often feel, although it's the most difficult thing to do, I often feel that if we were able to look upon such experiences in that light, as they were happening, then they wouldn't last for so long. They would pass much more quickly. It's like everything. Everything we're afraid of. If we face it and we acknowledge that it's there, then the fear disappears. One of your great presidents, Roosevelt, said, "You have nothing to fear but fear itself." And so it is. As soon as you face it, as soon as you recognize it, as soon as you say, "Well, I'm going to fight you, I'm going to get over this," it's gone. Because fear is an ephemeral thing, and it's part of this physical side of us, in order to experience our physical life, we've got to stay here and we've got to be careful. We've got to be aware of the dangers of life and so on. And our ego, or our physical self, is designed to give us warning signs and protect us against that, but sometimes it goes over the top. And the real us is not that. The real us isn't this. You know, when you look into a mirror, you don't see the real you just see this physical body that you've adopted for a short time whilst you're here. The real you is the spirit. That part of the Great Spirit, which we call God, that part of the divine, which is within everyone. It doesn't matter, good, bad, or indifferent, we're all the same. But what changes us is how successful we are in blending our spiritual side with our physical side. We need balance. And of course, the Druids and the Celts, going back to where I began, they understood the need for balance. They lived in nature. To them, they didn't have churches like we have. They met in groves, in the woods. The ash groves were the famous song called the Ash Grove. And that came from those Celtic days when they gathered in the ash grove to worship the Great Spirit, to worship God, in the knowledge that all around them was the power of the Spirit, was the power of God, that the same Spirit that was inside them was inside everything that surrounded them in their grove. And they realized the link. And of course the Druids, who studied and sacrificed much time and effort in order to learn about the mysteries, knew how to harness the power of the Spirit. In the same way that many of the great mystics over the years have done. And we, as spiritualists, have a small inkling of this, that's all. We have been privileged to learn about how those who have passed from this life into the world of the Spirit can return and communicate with us. And also, we have been privileged on occasion to make contact with those who have risen higher in the world of the Spirit and are able to bring wisdom and guidance to us that we are unable to generate for ourselves. But as to the great mysteries that the Druids were aware of and that the great mystics are aware of, we are still very ignorant. But we have this big advantage that we do know that life is eternal. We do know that this isn't all there is. And we also know that when the time comes for us to return to our home in the world of the Spirit, where we go is almost identical to where we are now. That there's no dramatic change. We don't find ourselves up on a cloud with a harp. When it is said that passing to Spirit is like moving into the next room, that's what's meant. It is literally that, because everything is so similar. And if you think about it, were it not the case, the shock to the system would be very great. So that adapting to life in the world of the Spirit is very easy, because it's just a continuation of your life here. But it's got a few advantages that we don't have here. For instance, if you want to be with somebody, you just think of them and there you are. Saves a fortune in bus fares, you know. And there's also the knowledge that the mind is everything. That the mind can be developed to such an extent that nothing becomes impossible. And of course this is something that the Druids knew. There have been many dramatic instances of mediumship among spiritualists, where people from the world of the spirit have become as solid as you and me. And that's all done by the power of the mind. There are minds in the world of the spirit who can convert the energy that we create when we're sitting together. They can convert that into solid matter. In other words, they do the reverse of what happens with the atom bomb. The atom bomb converts matter into energy. And, you know, it's rather typical, isn't it, of what we have become, that we use knowledge partially. We use it for destructive purposes. And yet, the use of the mind in the world of the spirit and how it can mould matter and how it can convert energy into matter shows that there is another side to this. If only we would open ourselves and we would lose fear, because all these problems, all the wars that have ever been, are due to fear. The fear that somebody's going to come and take this away or take that away. And if only we could get rid of this fear, then we could start to explore in the now the power of the mind. And we could call upon the help of the spirit world to guide us. They're not going to help us to design machines that destroy us and other life. But if we're devoting ourselves to creation, not destruction, then we get all the help you can imagine. And all this, coming back to my theme, all this for spiritualists began with children. It was the two little girls out in the wilds of New York State, not city. I know New York City is a bit of a wild place sometimes, but this was up in the state. And they had, their parents had rented this little cottage while they were having a house built. And there were lots of rappings and bangings that were going on in the house. But they weren't frightened, they thought it was great fun. And they used to play a game. They thought it was a man that was doing this, and they called him Mr. Splitfoot. And they used to say, "Do as I do, Mr. Splitfoot." And back would come 3 raps. And oh, they had a great time. But the parents were a bit worried about this. It was all very strange, very weird. Anyway, one night they gathered all the family together because it was stormy outside. And the girls were playing away. And suddenly one of them, instead of rapping, held up 3 fingers and said, "Do as I do, Mr. Splitfoot." And back came 3 knocks. And then this little girl shouted out, "Daddy, he can see!" And that's why we're here today. Because then her father realized there was a human intelligence behind all this. It wasn't just some random rapping and banging. There was purpose behind it. And he designed a system of communication, and they discovered all that they discovered about the peddler that was murdered there and so on. And at that time, because people opened themselves and welcomed this, suddenly mediums were appearing everywhere, all over the United States. People developed mediumship almost overnight because They were building, they were doing something positive. They were bringing information to people to comfort them and to make them happier here. And what is more, I suspect that the Spirit knew there was a distinct possibility of the war that came in 1914, and they wanted to try and get people into such a frame of mind through their awareness of the Spirit that the war would not take place. So you see what happens when we open ourselves. When we're positive, we get all the help that we want from the world of the Spirit. And when we feel sad, we're never alone. Those from the spirit world who are your loved ones draw close. And if you can remember this and try not to be too sad, and try not to be angry in your sadness, then you will feel their presence around you. If you're so upset that you feel anger, then you create a sort of barrier that they can't penetrate. But they are there. Never, ever are we alone. And it's wonderful to know that. And yet there are millions out there who have no clue about this at all. So that each one of us has a responsibility. Cilla Birch, that great teacher from the world of the Spirit, said, knowledge brings responsibility, and so it does. And we have a responsibility to pass on this information in any way we can. Not to be afraid to do it, to banish that fear. And in doing that, we banish the greatest fear that all those millions out there have, which is the fear of death. And all this came to pass because of the cry of a child. And so it's very appropriate on this May Day to think about the children dancing around the maypole with all those beautiful ribbons, and to thank God for the children.